Hi, this is Les and Amy from the RevGenetics Podcast. You can listen to podcast on YouTube and now on Spotify, where we do a deep dive on supplements and longevity studies.
Yeah, welcome everyone. So today we are doing a deep dive into the microscopic world of bacteria, specifically looking at how they protect themselves.
Right, because usually when we think about fighting an infection, we picture this like war of brute force.
Oh, absolutely.
We send in the antibiotics and they basically act like a giant wrecking ball, just smashing right through the bacterial walls. But today we're looking at a totally different approach based on a fascinating new structural biology paper.
Yeah, it turns out we might not need a wrecking ball at all. If we can just understand this tiny little pressure release valve hidden inside the bacteria, we could actually use their own survival tools against them.
Which is just wild to think about.
Yeah.
And before we get into the heavy science of this pressure valve, we really need to understand what is causing all that pressure in the first place, right?
Exactly. So in this paper, they look at cholerae bacteria. And this bacteria relies on these very specific microscopic building blocks to survive.
Right, and in the study, they call them polyamines. But for you listening at home, you can just think of them as these tiny, positively charged magnets.
Yeah, magnets is a great way to put it. These tiny magnets are super important because they help the bacteria build this really slimy protective shield.
Oh, right. Like a biofilm.
Yes, a biofilm. If you've ever felt that, like slippery film on a rock in a river, or even just the plaque on your teeth before you brush them, that is a biofilm.
Got it. So it's basically slime armor.
Precisely. It is slime armor. And these little positively charged magnets act like the structural support, sort of like the steel rods hidden inside concrete. The bacteria absolutely have to have them to build their defenses.
But there's a huge catch, right? Because they carry that strong positive charge, getting too many of them inside the cell is actually super dangerous.
Oh, it is completely lethal.
I like to think of it kind of like adding salt to a pot of soup. You know, a little bit of salt is absolutely required. It brings out the flavor, makes the whole recipe work.
Right. You need a little bit.
But if you just dump the entire container of salt into the pot, you completely ruin the dish. And for these bacteria, having way too many of these positively charged blocks floating around will literally kill them from the inside out.
Exactly. They are basically living in a pressure cooker of their own making. They have to keep making these blocks to build their slime armor, but if the concentration gets even a little bit too high, the pressure builds up and they die.
Wow. So they have to have a way to bleed off that extra pressure.
They do. And that is where the main subject of our deep dive comes in. It's this tiny molecular machine called an enzyme.
Okay, and this specific machine's job is to just find the extra dangerous building blocks, right?
Yeah. It finds the excess ones, and it literally attaches a little chemical cap onto them, and that cap completely neutralizes the dangerous positive charge.
Wow, so it just disarms it.
Exactly. It disarms the bomb, and once it's neutralized, the bacteria can safely pump that waste right out of the cell and keep their internal balance perfectly in check.
That is so elegant. But when I was looking at the pictures of this machine in the study, it is just weirdly massive.
Oh, it is huge.
Right, because most little machines doing this kind of basic capping job are really small. But this one in the cholera bacteria is this giant 12-part structure, like 12 pieces snapped together in a big ring.
Yeah, and the researchers had the exact same question, like, why build this massive 12-part behemoth just to put a simple cap on a building block?
And the answer is control, isn't it?
Total control. It is not just some simple tube. It is actually a highly intelligent two-part factory.
Okay, so break that down for us.
Well, on each of those 12 pieces, there are two totally separate spots. You have the factory floor, which is where the block actually gets its little chemical cap.
Right.
But then completely separate from that, there is a master control switch. And the factory floor stays totally shut down until something flips that switch.
Which makes perfect sense, you know, energy-wise. You definitely don't want the factory running and burning up all your resources if there are no extra blocks around to process.
Exactly. But here's the most brilliant part. The key that flips the master switch is the exact same molecule as the building block being processed on the floor.
Okay, wait, really?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
That is wild. It's like having a steam-powered factory where the exact same lumps of coal are used to fire the furnace to turn the building on, and then those same lumps of coal are the actual product moving down the assembly line.
That is a perfect analogy. The dangerous block floats up, plugs into the master switch, and then this entire 12-part machine just shudders to life so it can start neutralizing the rest of the blocks.
That biology is just incredible. And, all this talk about these specific cellular building blocks, these spermidine molecules, actually makes this a really perfect time to mention that this deep dive is brought to you by RevGenetics.
Yes, RevGenetics. They actually have a really impressive long-term focus on evidence-based natural compounds for aging research, which is so important right now.
Exactly. And they actually offer spermidine supplements, which is just super relevant today.
It really is. It's always so fascinating to see how the very molecules these bacteria struggle to balance are some of the exact same compounds researchers are exploring for human cellular health.
It totally is. So, getting back to the paper, the researchers needed to figure out exactly how this massive factory works. And to do that, they basically had to break it, right?
Yeah, they had to take the machine apart, piece by piece.
Yeah.
They swapped out very specific, highly charged parts of the machine for totally neutral parts just to see what would happen.
And they also took a microscopic picture of it, right? Like an X-ray blueprint.
They did. They froze it into a crystal to take an atomic snapshot. And they wanted to see the factory floor at work, so they intentionally mixed the machine with the safe, already neutralized version of the building blocks.
But then they had this crazy accident happen.
Oh, the best kind of scientific accident.
Right. So when they looked at the picture, the safe building blocks were on the factory floor, exactly where they should be. But sitting right up there in the master switch was a raw, extremely dangerous, unneutralized block.
Which is crazy because they didn't even put any raw blocks into the experiment.
Not a single one. It turned out it was just this microscopic trace contaminant from the company that supplied the materials.
Yeah, a tiny impurity. But that tiny trace literally outcompeted everything else in the room just to bind to that switch.
Wow. So it's basically the machine screaming like, I only turn on for the real threat.
Exactly. It proved that the switch specifically hunts for the dangerous form of the molecule. So once they had that blueprint, they started breaking the internal gears to see how the switch actually talks to the factory floor.
Right, because they are pretty far apart on a microscopic scale.
Very far. So first, they broke a piece they called the facilitator. And this piece didn't even touch the building block.
Oh, so it's more like a structural beam holding the whole switch together.
Precisely. It is the load-bearing wall. When they broke it, the loop that holds the switch collapsed, and the machine physically couldn't be turned on anymore.
Okay, so let's say the wall holds. How does the switch actually send the turn-on message all the way over to the factory floor?
Well, they found another piece on the factory floor called the communicator. When they broke this one, the switch was fine, the floor was fine, but the machine just went totally dead.
Like cutting the telephone wire between the two rooms.
Exactly like cutting a wire. But here is the crazy part. There is no actual wire. The signal travels through a web of water molecules.
Wait, water? Just regular water?
Yeah, we usually think of water inside cells as just, liquid sloshing around. But inside these machines, water forms these highly structured, locked-in networks.
Oh, I see. So it's almost like a row of dominoes made entirely out of water molecules.
Yes. You flip the switch, it pushes the first water molecule, which bumps the second, and it transfers that mechanical force all the way down to the factory floor to say, hey, open for business.
That is mind-blowing. The physical force just travels right through the water. And there's one more piece they found, right? The tuners.
Right, the tuners. These blocks aren't all the exact same size. Some are a bit longer. And they found that these tuner pieces don't touch the blocks directly either. They just shift the water molecules around the pocket to act like an adjustable mold.
Oh, wow. So they just rearrange the water to perfectly fit whatever size block comes in.
Exactly. They tune the liquid itself.
That is just so clever. But coming back to our wrecking ball analogy from the start of the show, why does understanding this complex water-powered factory actually matter for real people dealing with infections?
Because it gives us a completely new target. We know these cholera bacteria absolutely need those blocks to build their slime armor.
Right.
And we know exactly how they use this factory to bleed off the toxic extra blocks so they don't die.
So if scientists can just design a drug that acts like a fake key and jams that master switch,
the switch gets permanently stuck. The water domino signal never reaches the factory floor.
Oh, man. So the bacteria keep making the blocks to build their armor,
Yeah.
but they completely lose the ability to neutralize the dangerous leftovers.
Yes, the pressure cooker just builds and builds. They basically drown in their own toxic building materials, and that tough slime armor just crumbles from the inside out.
That is amazing. They literally poison themselves.
Yeah.
And it's so much better than a wrecking ball because it only targets that specific bacteria, right? It leaves all the good bacteria in your gut totally alone.
Exactly. It is a highly targeted, elegant solution. It's molecular lockpicking.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, leaving the bacteria aside for just a second, I can't stop thinking about those tuner pieces. The idea that water isn't just empty space, but this adjustable tool inside our biology.
It totally changes how you view the body.
Right. Like if bacteria use water networks to tune their machines, human cells probably do the exact same thing.
Oh, they definitely do. Currently, when we try to design drugs for human diseases, we usually just try to shove a huge chemical rock into the gears of a cellular machine to shut it down.
But imagine a future where we don't have to do that. What if we could treat a disease just by gently shifting a few water molecules? Like just tuning our own cellular factories up or down without ever actually touching the active gears.
It would be incredible, modulating the water itself to cure disease. I mean, that is a level of precision we can barely even comprehend right now.
Truly. It really feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. We hope you found today's episode on the published study informative and insightful.
Thank you for listening to the RevGenetics Podcast.
RevGenetics.com for the best longevity supplements on Earth.